Hello fellow egoists! Today we'll be doing a deep dive into the Manshine vs Barrow match and highlight all the details that deserve it, along with showing the sort of mini journey that Nagi went through in the nail, and finally his absolute failure as an egoist. Though, before getting into the match itself, let's talk a bit about the chapters preceding it, first starting with chapter 240. After being thrown on the ground by Rinz's powerful shoulder tackle as he scored in the last match, Nagi asks some questions to Rin, with all of the said questions relating to Nagi's search of something new. Where does he need to go and how should he keep on moving on? To which Rin responds that no matter what happens, whether heaven or hell is next, one must always write their own story. Basically reminding us to be the protagonists of our own stories instead of letting things flow out and be a victim to what one might call fate. Moving on to chapter 245, where we then get to see Manshine vs Ubers and two key things relating to Nagi. First off being his inability to think and keep composure in front of the goal, with Ryo's words being the only thing that got him to keep moving, a clear foreshadowing of what would be coming for him later on, along with the second thing that's most important to us, that being Barrow's talk with Nagi, where Barrow tells to Nagi that he isn't a pain anymore, that Nagi is seemingly just pretending to fight and that with such a fake and borrowed ego, Nagi won't be able to push through to the world stage. If Nagi were to get higher in the football world, he first needs to die. We then go on to chapter 247 titled Originality, with the first part of the chapter being about Ryo and Nagi trying to find a way to survive, and most importantly, Nagi realizing that if they want to survive they'll need to change, that they can't just stay the way they are. Though, there are three details that are really important to highlight past this. First off being Nagi's obsession with catching up to his rivals, yet also noticing his lack of fire as he calls it. Showing to us that while Nagi is aware of the state he is in, he's trying to find a way out of it, realizing that he has to change. Yet, what does he do when he's faced with this realization about himself? He then proceeds to ask to Ryo to give him a new fire. And while the panel may look cool, when we tie Nagi's words into what the advices given to him were, we see our first big red herring to Nagi's future fate. Rin and Barrow's advices boil down to telling Nagi that he needs to fix his problem of heat, of motivation, by himself. That if he wants to continue on the world stage, he needs to find a fight that truly gets him riled up and fiery. That he needs to write his own story by himself, and Nagi proceeds to then ask to Ryo to give him a new reason to fight. A new way to fight, going the total opposite of the advices that were given to him, and by extension, the way for an egoist to fight. And with this in mind, we can then see the second detail that's important. The fact that chapter 247 first shows us Nagi's decision to rely on someone else for him to find a new goal, and generally a lack of soul searching, only to then have the second part of the chapter being about the definition of originality by Ego Jinpachi. That is to say, what does one hunger for? So with this we see that the manga shows us the steps needed to succeed in Blue Lock, as in that one must follow their originality, one must chase what they hunger for and do their best to turn it into a reality, but also shows us in the same chapter the example of someone going against the advice given and how that might look like. Keep this in mind because this is not the only moment in which the story does this type of thing. And now for our final detail, which is more of a minor one and tying more into Nagi's deeper ego, comes in the paneling of Nagi's words being tied with the comments about him, where we're seeing that as he says that he's been feeling a bit weird, we get a shot of the comments saying that Nagi is nothing more than a what-hit wonder. And at the same time, shows us comments cheering on Nagi right before his speech about needing to constantly change. As if those comments were sort of helping him be fired up. Now, with all this said though, we can finally head on to the actual barcha vs Manshine match, and see what exactly was Ryo's plan to give a new fire to Nagi. Starting the match off with chapter 295, where we get to see a monologue of Nagi tracing his story in Blue Lock, and all that he has acquired through it, with the final sentence of it being that if he can't dream of the world's best, then it is all over for him and Ryo. With this, we head on into the kickoff after the reveal that Ryo's plan is about changing their objectives and mentality in this match. That is to say, for Nagi and Ryo to try and make plays that will help the team and help them prove their own value. And if you were paying enough attention in the PXG match, you might come to realize that the mindset that Ryo is trying to use for both him and Nagi is one of talented learners. That is, to actualize one's proof of existence via numbers. Which is why, by following this plan, Ryo is able to get a great assist for Chigiri and so prove his existence, for he is a talented learner. While for Nagi, he is instead unable to do anything as he is instead a genius. Meaning that him trying to follow the mindset of talented learners will just not help him change anything. As Isagi said in the PXG match, unless my talent and efforts align, nothing will happen. Now, moving on to chapter 296, we get more of Nagi and Ryo being unable to do anything of value together, with Bachira and Otoya absolutely styling on them, with Bachira showing an insane dribbling catalog, and what might be one of the most insane finishes we've ever seen in Blue Lock up to this point, with him scoring a curved volley while being in the air, from the beginning of the fucking penalty area, which is just unheard of. There's lots of examples of people doing insane curved volleys outside of the box, examples of people doing insane jumping volleys, but to do both at the same time and with such a huge distance is simply godlike, and Bachira knows it. To get back to our original point though, with those two goals, Nagi sees the beauty and amazing fire in Otoya and Bachira, trying to think of a way for him to get into the same state, and here we get one of the most important details about Nagi's mindset that might fly over a lot of people's head at first, but that shows a huge difference in mentality between Nagi and other characters in Blue Lock. What new type of self that Nagi is chasing is a self that makes him believe he is the best in the world, which is actually a far cry compared to Isagi's path that was highlighted earlier in the chapter, where instead Isagi tries to slowly build himself up to become the world's best. From first trying to prove his worth in the barcha match, then proving he can be the protagonist of the match in the Manshine match, then building his own path to becoming the world's best in Ubers, and finally actualizing it in becoming the number one in PXG. But here, Nagi instead tries to outright skip the steps that Isagi went through and immediately find a version of himself that is the best in the world. And this also ties into Nagi's goal in Manshine against Ubers, where Nagi's quote after having beaten Isagi thanks to his 5-stage fake volley isn't that he can become the best, but rather that he is the best in the world. And this detail right here is one of, if not the most defining trait of Nagi Seishiro compared to other characters, and what you might even call a sort of god complex. Where other characters try to aim for a path to become the best, to gradually evolve into it, Nagi instead thinks that he already has the necessary things to become the best in the world and just needs to be able to dive into a fire that lets him believe he is to become it. This might not seem like much, but it explains a lot of things about Nagi's character. Such as, for example, his speech in the last 4v4 of episode Nagi, where Nagi sees that trying to play logically is the right step for his team, that this is what it means to be a team, what it means to win. This reality doesn't actually fire him up. And why exactly? Because in his mind, Nagi is above that. He is above being a simpleton who needs to fight to survive. He is above that. With this parenthesis done, and what that is meant to open up how you might view Nagi, and I hope it did, we can head back on to analyzing our match. And if you want a more in-depth look into this topic of Nagi's mindset, then I'll link a thread I did back in the day about it, which also ties into the whole Blue Lock TV comments paneling thing that we talked about earlier. After Nagi is done with his monologue, we get a small conversation between Ryo and Nagi, where Nagi sees that it's not only Otoya and Bachira that are amazing, but Ryo has to become strong and dazzling. With their conversation continue on to chapter 297, Nagi sees that while Ryo isn't as fired up about him as he was before, he still strives to help Nagi by giving him a dream to fight for. With this realization and his past failures, Nagi tries to do something different now. He'll try to fire up Ryo about him once again by trying to fire himself up. To put it another way, trying to live for someone else's sake. But before we get to see this in action, we instead cut Isagi's point of view and most importantly, a monologue about how while one may be able to get themselves better through reproducibility of their skills and different ways of actualizing their hunger, all of it starts with the fire they feel inside, that only those who are able to seize and use that fire can survive, and that the ones who misjudge it will fall by the wayside. Which might be a cool monologue for some, but even deeper than this is the same type of warning that we had gotten back in chapter 247 about originality, where we got an exposition of the right mentality and path to survive in Blue Lock right after a decision by Nagi. And so with this in mind, we can then see that this narrative exposition follows the same principle as the chapter about originality, since just like how we saw at that time that Ryo's plan didn't work, now Nagi's approach of trying to live for someone else and by extension to give up on his own ideal, to get fired up for someone other than himself, has ended in failure with him being unable to do anything once again, avoided by Chris Prince and Ryo being the one to score. But here Nagi shows a maturity and self-awareness that we haven't seen before, by seeing that all of his previous attempts failed not because of Ryo, but instead because he was dodging the core problem. He kept relying on Ryo instead of trying to find a way for him to get fired up by himself. The real reason Nagi wasn't able to be active, as Agi puts it before, wasn't because Ryo was forcing Nagi into this position, but because Nagi instead was being comfortable in it, and kept hugging Ryo. But with this recent realization, now Nagi faces reality for what it is. Nagi's final stand has started, and this time Nagi wants to face it all, to prove to himself that he can win without Ryo, that he can fight on his own, and most importantly, face his fear of losing Ryo for the first time in his life. By using this fear as a fire to use his hunger for survival and to prove to himself that he can dream of being the world's best on his own, as a means to stand beside Ryo at the end of it, Nagi is able to finally create an offensive play by being the center of the team. To stay with Ryo, he is now ready to put in his all to become a person who can dream of being the world's best on his own. But this time, dreams by themselves won't cut it. As Otoya comes to press Nagi, we get to see the deepest parts of Nagi's fears. For the first time in Nagi's Blue Lock life, we get to see him truly fearful, to see inside of his mind and all the doubt that is in it. Where before Ryo was there to save him and pull him out of it, like in the Ubers match, now Nagi needs to be able to do it all by himself if he ever wants to stand a chance to be able to be with Ryo. Though, again, who is it that comes to give light to Nagi's dark world of fear and despair? Ryo with a great run in perfect position to receive a pass. But one thing that's truly important here is that Ryo doesn't actually ask for a pass. All he simply does is call to Nagi, to get Nagi's attention. Whatever Nagi does here is purely and entirely on him, for he is not called upon for anything. All Ryo does is show his presence to Nagi, and so Nagi is forced now to choose. Will he face his challenge all alone? Will he fight all alone to stand near Ryo? Or will he rely on Ryo to pull him out of the consequences of his own actions and the difficulties of life? Just like he did back when he asked Ryo for his help in the Manshine match, instead of facing the fact that he couldn't beat Isagi by himself. And well, we all know the choice that Nagi took. But sadly, or maybe for the best, this time Nagi's dream and naivety won't be saved by miracles or luck or anything that could protect him from the consequences of his actions. Bachira comes in to steal the ball and make Nagi face everything that he had dodged up to this point. His accountability, his responsibilities, his life and the choices he made with it, which all finally led him here. A failure of an egoist who fled from writing his own story when it mattered most and will pay the price for it. His life in Blue Lock. So now, with an overview of all the chapters relating to Nagi ever since his first talk with Rin and until the most recent chapter, let's summarize a bit the actions the manga took to be as thorough as possible in terms of exploring Nagi's failure as a striker and an egoist. The catalyst to all this in the end came from Nagi's initial decision to call out for Ryo's help to beat Isagi instead of facing the fact that he couldn't beat Isagi currently. instead of facing the pain that came from not being able to reach for his dream and the lack of fun that came along with it. Nagi instead called for someone's help, and so took the easy way out of his own story. But by doing so, he basically got into a point of his story where he didn't have the tools necessary to continue past it. To put it in a sort of gamer type of way of saying, since we're talking about Nagi here, it's as if Nagi basically skipped an entire mission by using a glitch, and soft-locked himself out of progressing further into the story of that game because of it. To beat Isagi all alone, Nagi would have needed to develop tools and motivations that would have made him actually being able to beat Isagi. But by having Ryo's help, Nagi basically called upon a cheat code to help him beat Isagi without having developed the necessary tools by himself to do so. But now that he has beaten Isagi without those tools, he's thrown into a part of his life where he could only continue further if he had the tools and motivation that he would have developed by discovering how to fight alone to try to beat Isagi. But now, without those tools, he's simply unable to continue on forward and die because of it. But what would those tools be exactly? Well, to put it simply, an actual awareness of his ego, the thing that Ego Jinpachi himself called out in chapter 2 of episode Nagi. By realizing more deeply what his ego past Ryo is, Nagi would have been able to immerse himself into a reality where he could fight alone. But by beating Isagi without taking anything away from the why he felt so good after beating Isagi, and instead only taking in the pleasure of doing so, Nagi has doomed himself by basically having no awareness of something that could get him fired up past Isagi. Now basically being forced into a sort of reactionary role of his own story where he has no real desires that are strong enough, nor the self-awareness of those desires so that he could develop them to become stronger and be a new fire, being left with nothing but his relationship with Ryo. And so with this we can now understand why Nagi passed to Ryo when it mattered most. The core idea is that Nagi's only remaining desire that was strong enough for him to keep on going was staying with Ryo. But because of this, he couldn't develop out of his relationship with Ryo. To put in sort of another analogy, let's imagine that you're in life with your partner, but because of rising prices and inflation, you need to get a better job if you want to stay with that person. So you try to take a test to get a better job so that you can stay with that person. But when things start to get hard in terms of studying for your exam, your partner comes to visit you at home so that they can help you. But because your actual desire is to stay with that person and not to pass the test itself, you stop studying the test and fail it because at the end of the day, what you wanted most is to be with that person and that desire took over, even if in the long term you'll be unable to stay with that person because of this. So while wanting to stay with Ryo isn't inherently bad, the problem lies more so in the fact that it's Nagi's only desire, or rather, that he is aware of and has developed. Not necessarily that being with Ryo is his one and only true ego. For Nagi to be able to get further into life and for him to truly be complete, for him to be able to live as an egoist, he needs to be able to live outside of Ryo. And so the lock-off for him is the perfect way to be forced into such a situation. When he is away from Blue Lock, will he still only yearn to be with Ryo? Will he find something deeper than wanting to stay with Ryo? Will he be able to live with himself and without Ryo? And most importantly, if he ever manages to live without Ryo, would he even still want Ryo? And to get it into a sort of parallel with another journey in Blue Lock, this is the same mistake that caused Kaiser's loss against Isagi in the PXG match. The core of Kaiser's ego after his awakening was to feel alive, and so the way he found to do so was through the quest to surpass the impossible. But when he then teamed up with Isagi, he found another path to have fun in life, to feel alive. That is to play by following freedom. To play following his own impulses instead of trying to surpass the impossible through whatever means possible, even if it came via the pain of feeling like a piece of shit. So at the end of the day, both of them failed because they couldn't go through with what they needed to do in order to get higher in life, because it was too painful, though it doesn't mean that this is necessarily the bad choice, especially for Kaiser, who found happiness in freedom compared to his upbringing and the pain that there was. Simply that life is about choices and priorities based on the priorities that they have at the moment. So while some may call it a failure, others may see it as opening a new path. At the end of the day, all of it simply rests on one question. What is it that you truly desire? To end off this video, we can see that Nagi failed and got locked off because he couldn't handle facing the pain of loneliness, and basically forced his way through even if that meant that he didn't understand himself. Nagi kept fleeing from the pain, whether it was the pain of thinking or the pain of being alone, and paid the price for it. He kept trying to flee from the pain of being alone through different escapes, whether it was by following the path someone gives him via the new fire of Reo, or trying to live for someone else by becoming the Nagi that Reo desired. All of them being borrowed egos that didn't come from his true depth, to then finally following what he truly wanted, to live purely to stay with someone else, and more importantly the comfort that came with it, even if it meant fleeing from his one and only chance to survive, and in the end paid a steep price for it, being banished from the place where only egoists can live. Well, let's just say that anything besides death is something that one can get back up from, and we will have to see if Nagi has what it takes for it. And with this, the video is finally over. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and while here we talked about the whys of Nagi failed, we didn't talk about why Nagi even desired things the way he did. Why did he desire Reo? Why did he not face the pain of loneliness? Why did he say that he could easily envision scoring the final goal yet pass the ball when it finally came to be? Those are questions for the Understanding Ego episode for Nagi, and I hope you guys will be there to see it. Don't forget to check out the Discord server of the channel if you guys want to have some greater conversations about all of this, and also my Twitter profile, where honestly I do shitpost a lot, so go watch it at your own risks. But either way, I hope you guys had a great one, and see you guys next time. Bye bye, fellow egoists.